Are you supposed to have two hearts in there? What? You got two hearts and three lungs, but one of them's a bionic. Alric's eyes opened. He was staring at a rusted ceiling, filthy with years of dirt. He ached all over, the pain accented by the faint swaying that told Alric he was back on the hecatomb. The light was poor, but it still pounded against Alric's eyes. I am a space marine. What? Said the voice. On Jakasi? Throne be praised or damned, I don't know which. How did you get here? Vanalator, said Alric. He sat up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He had suffered worse injuries before. He could live with it. He was at once he was at one end of the huge chamber inside the hecatomb. Banks of cells rose on either side, connected by walkways. The floor was filthy, scattered with straw or piles of rags that might have been prone bodies. Prisoners were everywhere, arguing over gambling games, snatching sleep in corners, whispering conspiratorially. Some of them were human, with a few Xenos mixed in. Alec recognized Gareth, idly sharpening a knife in the corner. At the far end was a heap of filth and trash that was evidently home to a group of orcs, separated from one another by bars hung with gory orcish trophies. One of the greenskins was the same one-eared orc that Alric had seen in the arena. About half a dozen more of the creatures squabbled and fought in the shadows. Alric realized that the isolation cells were probably below this deck. The majority of the slaves lived here, kept isolated by fear of one another more effectively than the bars of individual cells. Alric was sitting on a large, stained iron slab. Sitting over him was a pudgy, middle-aged man. Standing over him, rather, with a beard, wearing an old apron stained almost black with blood. A few blunt medical instruments were laid out beside Alric. Haggard, said the surgeon. Medical officer second his class. Justicar Alric, replied Alric. You were Imperial Guard? Haggard shook his head. Agrippina Planetary Defense Forces. The ancient and honorable 51st Governor's own rifles. A whole lot of us surrendered at Mount Dagger. Turns out we should have fought to the death, but the eye had only just opened. We didn't know what we were facing. Alec tested his shoulder. It would hold, he decided. I pulled a handful of you out, continued Haggard. You weren't supposed to survive out there, you know. You were sacrifices to celebrate the last slave revolt. There was a revolt. About for half a day, the arena slaves and Alzane got organized and broke out. The Ophidian Guard were waiting for them. Lord Ebendrake's personal army. You seen him? The lizard? The lizard! The games are celebrating the revolt being crushed. That's why Ebendrake's champion was there. You were sent there to die. My battle brother did, said Alric. Skarhadoth killed him. I heard. I know you'll want revenge. It's what I wanted too. When Venalator's army hit Agrippina, I lost everyone and everything. But this is Drakasi, Justicar. Korn visits this world. Surviving here is victory enough. You either fight, which is exactly what Venalator wants you to do, or you die. Simple as that. I'm only alive because I'm more useful patching up gladiators than acting as one more piece of arena fodder. Then that's why we are. Then that's what we are, said Alric bleakly. We are tools of the blood god. A lot of us chose death instead, said Haggard. The rest will think they're saved, or think they can break out on their own. Some of us, like me, are too cowardly to do anything else, and some enjoy the bloodshed, of course. Like Gareth. Haggard smiled. Gareth's pure psychopath, and he's not the only one. The first thing that happens when chaos takes a world is that the prisons get emptied. The prisons get emptied. For men like Gareth, Drakazi's not that different to their old life. There are a few who have plans, of course. See up there on the third deck? Haggard pointed to a bank of cells suspended high above. Alaric followed his gaze and picked out a pale figure in one of the cells, patiently polishing a suit of green armor. A sword was propped up against the wall beside him. Eldar, said Alaric, more Xenos. That's Kelhadros, said Haggard. Believe me, my mother taught me to hate the alien. Just like the preacher said. But Galhadros is one of the best fighters in Vanalator's stable. And I'll be damned if he doesn't have a plan to get himself out of here. How long do we last? Asked Alaric. Depends. Few here were long before me. Most don't make it through their first fight. If you're here at all, it means you're tougher than most. Vanalator keeps his best slaves and carts them around Dracasia and the Hecatomb to send them out against the other lord's gladiators. The damn planet is one giant temple to blood, and the arenas are the altars. It's a sacred business, all this death. Alaric slid off the slab and got to his feet. He was still wearing the piecemeal armor he had been given by the alien slave prior to the arena fight. He would have dearly loved to have his own war gear back. And here you do as you will, said Haggard. The weak are weeded out quick enough, but try to get anywhere else on the ship, and the scaphulids will know. The Nalator will have you hung from the prow or fed to the greenskins. Halvern, the best soldier Alaric had ever fought alongside. Halvern, who would have been appointed a Justicar with his own squad, and sooner than later. He could have risen higher than Alaric, to the ranks of brother captains, perhaps even a Grand Master in charge of whole armies, and privy to the highest circles of the Ordo Malleus. Halvern was gone, and Khorne had taken his share of the death. Make sure you stake your claim soon, said Haggard. Plenty of slaves didn't come back today, and there'll be a rush for their cells. Good ones are rare. I'll do that, said Alaric. He saw a group of slaves clustered around one cell. They were on their knees, and they were praying. Alaric went to join them. Lieutenant Erkar raised his hand slowly. His eyes turned towards the cell floor. The horror of this world would be matched by the splendors they would one day witness. They had to remember that no matter what, no matter how hard it got. Erkar placed his palms down on the altar. It was a huge stone head, which had originally belonged to a statue of an idealized human. Its face noble, with long aristocratic nose, and its hair in some dense marble curls. It was presumably some champion of chaos or aspect of Khorne, but it had long ceased to serve that purpose. It was beautiful. While so much on Dracasia was ugly and forgotten by the planet's overlords, the believers had placed their faith in it. It was the face of the Emperor on Dracasia, an icon of sin transformed by their faith into something beautiful. That we must be tested, said Urkar, as a measure of our faith. For such faith would mean nothing if we lived lives free of suffering. For every moment of pain, we thank you, our Emperor. For every brother and sister taken from us, we rejoice. For every victory of the enemy and the blood god's brood, we celebrate. For the true victory is the stealing of our faith in our hearts. Around him, the faithful listened patiently. Most of them with the same threadbare dark blue uniforms as Erkar, and a few still had the insignia of the Imperial Navy. Some of them had joined the faithful later on, but the core of the congregation were men and women that had been captured when their spacecraft, the Pax Dinatos, was boarded and its crew handed to Venalator as tribute. They have celebrated the destruction of our brothers in the revolt, said Hogan's, once a gunnery sergeant master aboard the Pax. We lost many faithful in those days, and games have taken place to mark the Black Lizard's triumph over them. How can we take comfort from this? I feel my faith is shaken. Lieutenant, I feel something at my core is missing. Urquhart stood up. In spite of the darkness and the grizzled face Jacassi had given him, he still exuded the presence of an officer. The Emperor takes away those crutches you use to hold yourself up, Hogan's. Rejoice in that emptiness. Think how how much the sight of the promised land will fill you up now that you have lost so much. Would that we could all feel such despair. Urquhart was about to continue when he noticed the huge shape in the walkway outside the cell door. It was not a scaphoid slave master, or even one of the Hecatomb's more violent and spiteful prisoners. It was an enormous man, a clear head taller than the tallest man there, dressed in scrappy piecemeal armor that couldn't hide his exaggerated musculature. Many backed away from him in fear. Have you come to share in the promised land, stranger? Asked Arkhar. It's the Space Marine, said Hogan's in a voice little more than a whisper. Hogan's had been the chief of a gun crew back on the Pax. He was a big man, and he shied away from the newcomer. They said Venalator had got one alive. I didn't believe it. I think there is much need for prayer, said Alaric. I would like to join you, Father. I am Lieutenant Urquhart of the Emperor's spaceship, Pax Dianatos, replied Urquhart. I am not the father of anything. And may I ask your name? Just the car Alaric. Urquhart smiled. There's always room for a newcomer, as long as he has the capacity to believe. We were sent here to be tested after all. Jacassi is a torment for us all, though which the Emperor will know his own. You must have given some thought to escape, Lieutenant. Many have tried before, Lord Marine, said Hogan's. Believe me, I was nearly one of them in the old days, but every time anyone tries, they die. They either get cut down in the attempt, or they're hunted down and thrown out to die in the arena. It's just another kind of sport for them. Brother Hogan's is correct, said Urquhart. The closest anyone got was very recently, not more than a month ago. Hundreds of slaves made a break for the arena at Azaldine. Some of the faithful were with them, but the Ophidian guard were waiting for them, Eben Drake's own, and they died to a man. They spent many months in preparation, so it is said, but it all ended in a few hours. This planet is ruled by Korn, said Alric. Of course, it would not be easy to escape, but I take it the fact has done little to dull your determination. Urquhart shook his head. Escape is a dream, Justikar. Physical escape, anyway. You see, everything I have seen on Jacassi has led me to conclude that we are here for a reason. The Emperor delivered us here because this is the first step to the path to the Promised Land. If we stay faithful, we shall be delivered to that Promised Land. For every sin that is committed against us, one more glory shall be ours when the Emperor leads us there. It is the only way Jacassi can be made to make sense. The Emperor created Jacassi? Said Alaric warily. No, Justikar. Jacassi was created by evil men. The Emperor brought us here because we are his faithful, and it is only through suffering the works of these evil men that we can be made pure enough to ascend to the Promised Land. If you join us in our faith, then you will be led there too. Back in the Imperium, Lieutenant, what you just told me could be considered heresy. But we are not in the Imperium. No, we are not. And where is the Promised Land? I have preached that there is a place to which we will be delivered, a land of peace and plenty, where there is no pain. As to whether it is really a place, or somewhere inside us, is a matter for a man's conscience. You, however, I feel, will not be content to seek this solace yourself. You want to escape and get revenge. Perhaps, replied Ulrich. You need allies. Not even a space marine can get off Drakasi on his own. You thought that these poor religious fanatics, you would think there were some kind of icon sent by the Emperor, and that they would sacrifice their lives for your benefit. We are all equal on Drakasi, Justicar, even space marines. If you want to get away from here, the Promised Land is the only way. Faith will conquer Drakasi, not you. And if you want to bring Duke Venalator to task, perhaps you do not know enough about him. He bested me and took me prisoner, replied Alaric. I am under no illusions as to his capabilities. Then you know why he is held in esteem by Lord Ebendrake in the first place. I take it you do. Erkar shrugged. One hears things. Some of the slaves who were here when we were first captured are long dead now, of course. But then were there when Venelator raised the Hecatomb and took it his place among Drakasi's lords. He bested a demon, they said. The tale was passed down by generations of slaves before us. Its name was Rizeo. It is some magical thing the other lords despised. Venelator hunted it down, defeated it. The other lords hated it, but that hate won him power. Hatred and power are the same thing on Drakasi. That is the world we have come to endure. It sounds like you are willing to sit and take whatever chaos throws at you, Lieutenant, retorted Alric. When the Promised Land is in sight, Justicar, you will realize that nothing could be further from the truth. If you want to understand that truth, then join us. We will welcome you. Otherwise, fight and die. Without hope of the Promised Land, that is all there is for anyone on Drakasi. Alric turned away from Alric, placed a hand on the broken stone head that represented their emperor, and continued to pray. By the time the congregation had finished entreating the emperor for deliverance, Justicar Alric had gone. Ghost has some fun flavors. It's got fun flavors. Elazadni. 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 It is a song that brings the city into being, not the other way around. A million voices raised in song, a million more in pain, the chorus of chaos, an endless tune to which dance the very nethermost demons of the warp. The spires of the crystal city are a crown announcing the blood god's world, raised from the sands to resonate with the song by divine hand. The masters of its choirs direct the blood god's song from the throats of its slaves, torturing the finest howls, the terror, and caressing the most beautiful of paeans, the suffering. Was there any hideous thing so beautiful as Azaldine? Were ever glory and horror such close soulmates as in that great crystal cathedral? Was any god exalted as Azaldine exalts the Skull Lord of Drakasi? Mind Journeys of a Heretic Saint by Inquisitor Helmander Oswin. Suppressed by order of Ordo Hereticus. This damn song, said Girth. It gets inside your soul. Stay strong, said Alric. It's all right for you. Your kind get your minds rebuilt to cope with crap like this. Some of us are just mortals. Girth was sitting in the corner of his tiny cage, which was suspended from the ceiling over an open sewer of gore and effluent. Alric was in the cage next to him, and through the darkness, countless cells hung, each holding one of Venaltor's slaves. The slaves had been separated on the hecatomb and locked in these tiny cages, which then rattled along chains and rails in the dark crystal depths of the city. The song had begun as the hecatomb approached the city and had never stopped, but only gotten louder until it was as much a part of the place as the walls around them. The arena of Azaldane was above them, and even here, deep in the honeycomb of corrupted crystal in which Azaldane was built, the song keened from every direction. The orcs were singing their own song, a horrible sound, worse than Azaldane's music. The idea that any living thing could relish life on Jacassi was obscene. Do you know what we will be fighting? Huh? No one ever knows. I bet they've got something special for you, though. You must have thought of getting out of here, said Alric. Yeah, thought about it plenty. Though about getting skinned and eaten by the flesh hounds, too. Because that's the best I could hope for if they caught me. The way I figure, there's no way off this planet. The best I can do is make them suffer. Every now and again, we get to face something in the arena they don't want us to kill. When I come against something like that, I'm going to kill it. That'll hurt them more than anything I could do if it broke out. But all the killing is for the glory of Khorne. Every time you kill out there, you're doing for the will of chaos. Then, when they send you out there, just curl up and die. I don't care, Marine. I hear they killed your friend. That is true. The Imperium killed mine. The arbitrators dragged him around the back of the precinct fortress and shot him in the back of the head. There's nothing good in the universe to fight for. It's all going to hell. If you want to die out there, then be my guest. But make sure you take a good look around first, Marine. Because soon that's what the entire galaxy is going to look like. Then Venalator didn't have to take much to break you, said Alric levelly. You were Khorne's servant long before he ever found you. Girth spat at Alric. Alric ignored it. Men like Girth were a natural byproduct of the Imperium. The Imperium was a cruel place because the galaxy was cruel. Its people had to be oppressed because if they were free to do and think as they wished, they would do horrible things that would lead to the human race to destruction. Gareth was one of the many who didn't fit in with the mold of the Imperium. Sometimes Alric wondered if the Emperor could one day awaken and show the Imperium a way to survive that did not require such relentless cruelty towards its citizens. Do you really believe, Alric found himself saying, do you really believe, Alric found himself saying, that Jacassi could exist without people like you? Gareth gave Alric a full look of hate. Before he could retort, Alric's cell was cranked suddenly upwards. It was hauled up a stinking narrow shaft, and a thin veil of reddish light picked out the clawing marks on the sides. The sound of the arena crowd mingled perfectly with Azaldine's song, and a terrible harmony that could have broken in a man lesser than the Grey Knight. The light broke around him, the cage fell apart, and Alaric was standing in the center of Azaldine's arena. Activity. Oh man, that activity is hurt. It hurts me. Oh, okay. I'll have to go snip, snip. Excellent. Okay. The light was coming from a single opening in the sky above Alaric. Around him, a labyrinth spiraled off in all directions. It was a buried part of the city, its buildings rotting bastions of stone, with empty windows like blinded eyes and broken doorways like teeth and shattered mouths. Azaldine had always been grand, but now the excessive decorations had decayed into a parody of beauty. Sculpted pediments sagging and faceless statues lying in severed chunks in the pitted ground. Alaric spotted tiny glistening eyes winking on the walls, swiveling and following him. Through them, Azaldine was watching. He heard the cheer as they focused on him, a new player entering their game. He spotted the first body lying close by, slumped against the collapsed wall in a pool of glistening blood. It had originally been human, but more than Alaric couldn't tell, for it had been torn clean in two. Alaric picked up the rusted blade lying by the corpse's outstretched hand. Something lowered in the distance, deep and angry. Someone screamed. A cheer rose at that sound. Azaldine's song wove a different pattern here. Filtered through the layers of the city, its individual threads were clearer, and Alaric could pick out the voices, strangled sounds and gurgling, opening up to the glory of corn. He could pick out some of their words, too. They were telling him to be grateful, for very few were giving the honor of such a death. Alaric flinched at the movement nearby. Another slave skulked from the shadows. He was armed with a club and an iron spike through it. Alaric realized the man was a mutant, his scrawny body disfigured with tufts of waving cilia that wove up his neck and down his arms. He was dressed in the ragged remnants of armor. "Where is it?" the mutant demanded. "Where is what?" "What they sent us here to hunt." "I don't know. I haven't seen it." "Of course you ain't. What, you fresh out the sky?" "Yes." The mutant looked Alaric up and down. "What are you?" "I was going to ask you the same." "Touched," said the mutant with pride. "In the blood." Blood oozed from the fronds wriggling all over his skin. "Bleeding for his glory, weeping Korn's own tribute for..." A sound close by cut off the mutant's voice. A second later, a body crashed through a wall behind Alaric, bringing decayed chunks of marble crunching to the ground. Alaric rolled from the destruction and caught sight of the corpse out of the corner of his eye. Another mutant, a multi-armed creature, his chest an open red ruin, and his face locked in an expression of surprise. The clubbed-armed mutant roared and charged into the seething darkness. A musky hand grabbed him and dragged him. A muscly hand grabbed him and dragged him to the ruin of the wall. The mutant screamed, and it was a scream that went on far too long for the enemy to be killing him quickly. Alec ran around a corner, away from the enemy's line of sight. He still had not seen it, save for its hand. He heard it lumbering away, issuing a deep, rumbling growl, followed by a wet crunch that Alec guessed was the mutant's body being mashed against the ground. Alec caught his breath. The monster was definitely huge, and judging by the mutant's scream, it had more in its arsenal than mere strength. He could smell it too, a mixture of sweat and heady chemicals. Alric had emerged into a ruined town square, built around a grand fountain. The fountain's statues had lost their heads and hands in the water. If it had been water that flowed through it long ago, it has dried up. A sagging basilica stood along one side of the square, gutted by fire. The creature's smell told Alric that it had retreated in that direction. The sounds of its footsteps were all but hidden by the droning mass of Azaldine's song. But they were there, and audible enough for Alric to know that the beast was still close. A stone head on the ground looked up at him. Its eyes were the same as the ones studying the walls of the labyrinth. Alric stamped on it, shattering the head and crushing its eyes. Somewhere in Azaldine, he hoped, two members of the audience were blinded. The basilica's interior was twisted by heat and decay. Columns bowed under the strength of a half-fallen roof. Skeletons embedded in the stone of the columns were petrified like fossils, reaching from the rock as if they had been when they as if they had been alive when they returned to stone. Alaric backed up against the pillar. He looked down at the sword in his hand. It was pathetic, little more than scrap metal beaten into shape. It was worse than nothing. He put it on the ground at his feet. He listened to the song. It was telling him to welcome death and let it speed him towards a blessed release from life's pain. He ignored it. The song might have wormed its way into a broken man's mind, but Alec was better than that. He listened harder. He could hear drops of water spattering through the hole in the roof, and the sound of the city groaning as it settled. He listened to the song. He listened harder. He could hear drops of water spattering down through the hole in the roof, and the sound of the city groaning as it settled. The Space Marine's senses were all greatly enhanced, but rarely had so much hinged on Alaric being able to make the most of them. It had come through the basilica, up to the rubble at the far end, and it headed upwards. Alaric slipped from behind the column and began to hunt. He crept through a collapsed colonnade that had once fronted a mighty palace, now collapsed into a sprawl of rubble. He followed the trail through its cellars, between moldering works of art, and altars to the perverse faces of corn. The trail led through a garden of petrified trees, and a stream bed half filled with flaking dried blood. He moved past the pyramid of bones and a complex of slaughterhouses, where hooks still hung from rails, and the ceiling and an occasional skull dangled. Alaric knew that the beast he had trailed was close by. It was instinct as much as the signs, the fresh six-toed hoofprints on the wet floor, the newly killed hunters whose blood had yet to start drying, the smell of the chemicals, and the glints of blood, where the beast had torn itself on a sharp piece of rubble. Alaric slowed down, making every step an exercise in discipline, and he passed over the threshold of the slaughterhouse, onto the grand processional bridge. Once a great palace of Azaldine had risen over the rest of the city. It had long since collapsed, but the way up to it remained, a mighty bridge over a deep canal. Alaric walked carefully onto the bridge, keeping a statue between him and the hulking shape he glimpsed just among the stonework. The statues rose on either side of the bridge, a stern parade of Azaldine's kings, all of them dressed in obscene majesty that only accentuated their deformities. Eyes followed them, blinking excitedly as Azaldine watched. Alaric got a better look at the prey he had been sent to hunt. It was a hunched giant wrapped in swaths of scabed skin, covered in wounds and brands. Its back was to Alaric, and he saw that it sported a crest of bony spikes along its spine. Alaric recognized some of the beast's tattoos: an eye, a compass, a star. He had seen many times before, and it gave him an advantage the keenest of Dracassi's hunters lacked. "I know," Alaric said aloud, "what you are." The beast looked up from its meal, a hunter it chased and killed on the bridge. Alaric stepped out from behind the statue. The beast's face was humanoid, but no longer human, severely lopsided, with a single fang reaching out down past its chin. Its hands were fused in crab-like claws of muscle and talon. Its eyes were sunk deep into the scarred folds of its face, and it had to be blind. A larger third eye, and its forehead was closed. "When did they find you?" asked Alaric. "How long have you been down here?" The beast did not attack. Something like recognition came across its face. "Remember what you once were, navigator." Navigators were a paradox in the Imperium. They were members of a bloodline that sported a stable mutation in its genes. A navigator had a third eye, which he could look upon the warp and not be driven mad, as most men would be. As a result of the mutation, only they could guide a ship on long warp jumps, and without them, all ships would be limited to the stilted short jump journeys that meant civilian craft took decades to get between star systems. Without navigators, the Imperium's armed forces would reach war zones centuries late. Rapid forces like Space Marines would never be able to launch their lightning operations, and the Imperium, bloated and sluggish at the best of times, would fall apart. Their third eye, Spacefarer said, could kill a man with a look. It stood to reason that this creature, which had once been a navigator, would make for a very challenging quarry indeed. Alaric slowly approached the mutant navigator. Perhaps exposure to Drakasi's brand of chaos had mutated it, or perhaps it had been born that way, although the mutation was relatively stable. Alaric had heard tales from inquisitors of the monstrous aberrations every navigator family kept imprisoned beneath their estates on Terra. It did not attack. Alaric was probably the first person the navigator had encountered on Drakasi who had not tried to kill it. I know why they sent me here, said Alaric, as much himself as the navigator. You are supposed to kill me. The song of Azaldane rose to a sudden, brutal crescendo. The whole city shook. Chunks of masonry and statues clattered down the deep canal on the bridge. The navigator roared and reared up, clamping its paws down over its ears. Alaric, too, was shaken by the ferocity of the tonal cord, and then hammered from the city above. The navigator thudded down on all fours and roared at Alaric. His third eye snapped open. Alaric threw himself on the ground. A black ribbon of ragged power leapt from the navigator's eye and scored deep furrows across the bodies of the statues around him. A stone arm clattered to the ground. The sound almost lost amid the din. Alaric ran out of cover as the navigator's third eye spat dark power over the bridge. He sprinted for the navigator, head down at full tilt, and slammed into its side, vaulting over the side of the dark power and up its back. The navigator bucked to throw him off and reached up to grab him. Alaric caught its hand and forced his forefinger back, feeling ligaments snapping. The navigator's scream of pain mingled with the song, and Alaric was so dazed by the painful harmonics that he lost his grip and fell off the navigator's back. He reached around instinctively. His hand found the warm, sickly mask of the last hunter to stalk the navigator. He looked up and saw something metallic there, the broken haft of a spear ending in a jagged steel blade. The navigator's shadow fell over him as he grabbed it. The navigator's bulk fell down on top of Alaric's legs. The mutant's face was centimeters from his. The third eye opened again, the brow above it furrowed in anger and pain. The song had driven it wild. Azaldane was not about to cheat its audience of another death. Alaric rammed the spear up the navigator's face. The tip splintered against the stone, hard cornea of its third eye. The shaft followed it, shattering and filling its eye socket with splinters. The navigator barked angrily and jumped backwards, clawing at its face. Alaric jumped to his feet. The navigator was not a creature of Drakasi, but had been warped and rendered mindless by this world, turned into a weapon. Drakasi took good people and turned them into monsters. It wanted to do the same to Alaric, if it did not want to kill him first. The navigator charged, half blinded. Alaric jumped, not onto the creature's wounded face, but over it, his back smacking against the creature's hide as he rolled over it. The navigator continued, its massive momentum too great for it to stop. It smashed into the stone rail of the bridge and plowed through it. Its forelimbs found nothing as it powered forwards. The navigator howled as it fell from the bridge. The sound followed by a terrible wet thump as it smacked gorily onto the bed of the dry canal. Alaric picked himself up, breathing heavily. 1,000 eyes were looking at him. He had killed their navigator. That had not been in the script. Soldiers from Azaldane's battlements were dispatched to round him up, for the hunt was over, and the audience had gotten their blood. Alaric knew that the fight against the armored gauntlets holding him down would only give the city more bloodshed to gloat over, and so he let them wrap him in chains and drag him back towards the hecatomb. They had got their blood, but Alaric had got something too. Amongst the navigator's tattoos had been a familiar brand of a six-figured hand. The navigator could kill with a look from its third eye. It was a query intended to kill its hunter. That was why Alaric had been thrown into the labyrinth with it. The demon Agathrax had made sure Alaric was pitted against his best slave killer, and hoped that Venalator would lose his best new slave. The lords of Dracasia had a weakness that masqueraded among their number as a strength. They hated one another. Their weakness was that hate. Cowabunga. Cowabunga, cowabunga. The cool thing about being a European mutt is I can feast on fat and alcohol, and it can heal me basically from anything. I'm fairly certain that that's all it would take. If I was wounded and shot, they could put a feast in front of me of bad liquor and okay meat, and I think I could come back. Oh, and cheeses too, though. Cheeses are important. Yeah, the cheese, actually, the cheeses. If you couldn't do all three, it's the cheeses that would do it. So battlefield cheeses definitely. Oh. I hear many things, said the Eldar carefully, and I wish to know if any of them are true. Get away from me, said Alaric. I feel unclean enough as it is. Kelhedros tilted his head and looked at Alaric with utterly alien eyes. Alaric was in an isolation cell. Evidently, Venalator had been angered at Algothrax's attempt to kill Alaric with the Navigator and had taken out a measure of that anger on Alaric. Alaric was chained to the wall on the lower deck, and he was glad of it. Until Kelheldros' shadow had fallen across him, he had been alone. I have tried to understand you, continued Kelheldros. Your kind, I mean, your species. It is like facing an animal, but with its baffling instincts. Alaric had not had a good look at the alien before. Eldar were familiar to many Imperial citizens, since they were often depicted as weakling aliens crushed beneath the feet of conquering humans in stained glass windows or in the margins of illuminated prayer books. The truth was that no human artist could ever realize one properly. And Eldar looked almost human from a distance. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but everything else was different. And Eldar radiated wrongness, from its huge liquid eyes to the many jointed worm-like wavings of its fingers. They were disgusting and unnerving, and Alaric hated them. Kelhadros was as filthy and scarred as the rest of the slaves, but he still carried that typical alien arrogance with him. His armor still incorporated the jade green plates of the Eldar armor he must have been captured in. This animal will not heal to an alien, replied Alaric. Of course. You want to be free. They all do when they arrive. I have nothing to say to you. You want to get out, I want to get out too. I find you as vile as you find me human, but it cannot be denied that we have the same goal in mind. I think neither of us has had much of a chance on his own, but we are both far superior to the rest of Analator's rabble, and our skills would complement each other. Alaric laughed, and it hurt, since he was still battered from the fight with the navigator. Yes, I have seen what happens when a human enters into a pact with the alien. I was there at Thorngal Quintus. The Inquisition brokered an alliance between the Imperium and the Eldar there. I saw your Xenos fall on our troops as soon as the Daggerfall Mountains were secured. I saw you butcher us like cattle because you did not want anyone to know you needed our help to destroy what we found there. I will never trust your kind. You would see all of us exterminated just to save one of your own. You would kill us for your convenience. Kilhadros drew his weapon from his back, a slender chain sword, its teeth meticulously cleaned and glinted in the shadows of the isolation deck. The Eldar you fought alongside? Were they at the Scorpion Temple? Alaric sneered. They all look the same. You would have remembered, no Eldar is stronger or more resolute in the fall of the path of the Scorpion. The Scorpion is relentless. It cannot fail because it will die before its claws let go. And once it has its enemy in position, its sting always kills. I walked the path of the Scorpion before fate brought me here, human. They say that you are a hunter of demons. Something remarkable by the standards of your species. The Eldar think the same of me. The aspect of the Scorpion does not come easily to us. I'm not just another alien, Grey Knight, even to you. I am a striking Scorpion. And every living thing on this planet, I am by far the most likely to escape it. Without me, you will die, probably broken and a willing slave. Together we might return to galaxies we know. Think upon it, you have no other choice. I am very picky about who gets to betray me, said Alaric, knowing insults would be lost on the alien, but unable to help himself when confronted with such arrogance. And you don't make the grade. You will change your mind, Grey Knight, replied Gehaldros. It was unlikely that he even understood human hatred when he saw it. If he did not respond to it. I am out here, and you are in there. If you are so content to stay, then little I can say will sway you. Gehaldros gave Alaric one last glance, with those huge black eyes, and ducked back into the shadows. He was gone, with not even the sound of footsteps to suggest he was on the isolation deck. Alaric let himself wonder how Gehaldros had gotten down there at all. The alien had free run of the hecatomb and was certainly as tough as he suggested to have survived on Drukasi for so long, not least against the human slaves, whose ingrained instincts included hatred of the alien. However, Alaric knew what the Eldar could do. An oath from an Eldar meant less than nothing. It was a promise of betrayal. Alaric had a long time to think in the darkness beneath the hecatomb. Mostly, he thought about the hammer of demons. Gall! That seething pit of vermin. That film brimming, sinking hole of despair. In such degradation there is purity. In such ugliness there is wonder. In such death and suffering there is life. So holy to Drukasi, for it is life that must be ended. The endless slums of Gaul breed misery as they breed vermin. Its people are no more than vermin, writhing in an endless murderous mass, struggling to the surface to snatch a few moments of exultation. Was there ever such a city as Gaul, where the trappings of wealth and culture were stripped away to reveal the raw, bleeding organs of poverty and exploitation. Is there the truth of the human condition, that a human mind so easily stinks and sinks into animal violence and killing? It is a city of death where murder is the only way out, and where the most relentless killers find but another layer of Gauls anti society to slaughter their way through. This cauldron of hate, this pit of ugliness, this aeon's worth of murder forced into the crumbling shell of a city. From the blood that runs in the streets are writ the names of Corn. Mind Journeys of a Heretic Saint by Inquisitor Helmander Oswin. You know, I just asked myself if the Imperium would be better with or without the Inquisitors, and without a doubt, they'd be better. I mean, having the Inquisitors makes them better. Yeah, every one of these, for every one of these, but the only reason why is for every one of these betrayals, there's always one Inquisitor just waiting, just like I'm sure by now there's many that realize all they have to do is just watch another Inquisitor, and they can just kill that guy as soon as he becomes a heretic, and then just amass just a shit ton of power. That's what I would do. I wouldn't even bother. You wouldn't have to go far, and it happened. Like I'm telling you, it's not like that's what I would do. It's just that's what happens. You can look at Ravener Returned. He faces Eisenhorn, and they're basically doing that to each other. They're both just accusing each other of being corrupt, and one of them has to be right, right? One of them has to be right. So that's really what I would do, and that's why the Inquisition is still good. Is the Inquisitors love hunting down other Inquisitors? They love it. There's nothing they relish more, because they end up just there's always an accusation phase where they just point and be like, you suck, you're not a real Inquisitor, you're really awful, and a lot of times it sticks. And yeah, it's to the point where I actually end up just really accepting the whole corrupted Inquisitor trope, because it just happens nearly every time. It's just like, oh, what's the twist? Evil Inquisitor, no way. But I can't get enough of it. It's a facilitator for the carnage, all right? The plot, it can follow that, and it's cool, because look, there needs to be a twist. There just something needs to happen, as long as the battles are cool enough to justify it. And that's what makes the battle so fun, all right? Is the context leading up to it, okay? Because something about tabletop is if you do it right, you really could have that context to make it more than just this nameless force of nameless people is going against another force. And really, I think what I'm doing is hearkening to the more the earlier versions of 40K. So I think there's actually a very awesome workable solution that I need to try out, which is the Rogue Trader thing. Yeah, I do have some archaic resources that will be shared later. Alaric's first experience of Gaul was the stench. Down in the rowing decks, it rolled like a foul mist. It was decay and misery, sweat and effluent, the stink of endless poverty. "We're in the Narrows," said Haggard, chained to the bench just behind Alaric. Though the slaves were discouraged from speaking in the oar decks, the slavers seemed used to ignoring Haggard. "This is Gaul. It's a damned orifice." "Literally?" asked Alaric, for whom the images of the living city of Carnival was still vivid. "No, not quite. It's worse." Alaric peered through the oar hole in the hull. It was night, and the light of Jocassi's evil greenish moon. He could see piles of ramshackle buildings heaped up on the side of the blood canal. The canal was part of a spiderweb of bloodways that divided up this city into separate parts, presumably the Narrows after which the place was named, and the hecatomb moved slowly as its hull scraped along the side of the canal. Occasionally, a reedy scream filtered through the night air of the city, followed by a dull splash as a body fell in the blood. "A city of murderers," said Haggard. "Every madman and piece of filth under Cassie ends up here. They say it's a beacon that drags scum. What purpose does it serve?" "Purpose? There's no purpose here, just the car. It's just the city. Everyone in Jacassi has a reason to exist. Carnical is a predator. Azaldine was an altar to the blood god. What does Jacassi gain from Gaul?" Alaric looked out into the city again. Here and there, the inhabitants of Gaul, like primitives forced in the ragged clothes and let loose in the streets, skulked among the shadows, hiding from the moonlight. A rooftop fight sent a skinny body falling in the streets below. Freshly slain bodies lay like heaps of rags in the street, and the sense of fear emanating from behind the black windows of the hovels was enough to suggest that thousands of people huddled there in the nightly terror. Even those few glimpses of Gaul showed that killers walked every street, and murder was the sport of choice. "It's a farm," said Alaric. "This is where they breed their vermin." "Loose the anchors!" yelled one of the scaphoids in its strange accent. The oars were drawn in, and the heavy anchor chains rattled against the side of the hecatomb. The ship came to a slow halt along the massive dock of the Black Stone, where crowds of Gaul's vermin hurried to and fro and barked orders of mutant gang masters. "To arming!" yelled the scaphoids over the grinding halts of the hull against the dockside. The ship groaned as ramps were lowered, and the anchors reeled fast. Alaric knew the drill. He was starting to lose count of the number of times he and other slaves had been filed past the arming cages to pull on tattered armor, still bloodstained from its previous owner, and pick up a weapon or two. This time, however, it was different. In one armor cage was a scaphoid guarding an oversized suit of plate armor. "You!" said the scaphoid at Alaric's approach. "Here!" The armor was many times more lavish than anything the slaves had been given before. The breastplate looked like a pair of bat's wings, folded over the chest, and the shoulder guards were wrought into snarling faces. Scale mail protected the joints. Beside the armor was a two-handed sword that looked like it had been carved out of an enormous fang. "You're famous now," said Girth, who was choosing from a selection of rusted knives in the next cage. "Gotta look the part. They'll be betting on you and all sorts. Reckon you got the fan club. Kids who know your name." Girth smiled through his blackened teeth. "Eh? Maybe sign something for him? Tell him to listen to their mums, stay off the stims?" Alaric cast him a glance, and he looked back at the armor. It would certainly provide more protection than the disintegrating chainmail he usually wore, and which he had chosen purely because it was big enough to fit him. The sword looked useful too. Alaric pulled the armor on as the other slaves prayed or psyched themselves up. At the other end of the cages were the orcs led by One Ear, kept separate from the rest of the slaves, and they eagerly grabbed cleavers and swords. One Ear banged heads together and barked orders to keep them in line. Alaric wondered how long it would take before he was like them, before he lived for the fight. The balance of the sword was good, nothing compared to a nemesis weapon, but it would do. The ports swung open, and the slaves were herded out to kill and to die for corn. Minor incoherency detected. Seems to be around this point where I start becoming incoherent because I was starting to ramble. It's really scary how easy it is for me to read without actually realize what's going on. Terrible implications there. Gaul's arena, the Void Eye, was a squat cylinder of black rock honeycombed, with caves where thousands of Gaul's subhumans lived. Heaps of skulls lay at the bottom of the wall like snowdrifts, and the open corpse pits around it bubbled evilly in the darkness. Alaric could hear the sound of the crowds in the arena, hordes of scum eager to get their fix of bloodshed. He could hear clubs and whips hitting flesh, and knew that ranks of arena warriors would be funneling into the crowds through the entrances into the arena. Many of the vermin would die, but then that was why they were on Jacassi in the first place, to live short lives whose pain and bloody endings brought pleasure to the blood god. The slaves passed through an archway into darkness, hot and close. The scaphoids hauled the doors shut behind the slaves, and they were trapped inside, packed close. Alaric could see through the darkness, and he registered the familiar mix of confusion and apprehension on the faces of Vanalator's slaves. Even the orcs did not like it, and the human slaves kept as much distance as possible between them and the aliens. Gelhadros, on the other hand, looked focused. Nothing seemed to rattle the Eldar. Alaric looked out and picked out a small knot of faithful, clustered around Erhard and praying. Alaric pushed his way through the crowd and pulled Erkar aside. Lieutenant, said Alaric, whatever lies inside the arena, there's a chance that you will not survive it. A good chance. A good a good chance, replied Erkar, if the Emperor so wills. Then I may not get another chance to ask you. Alaric dropped his voice to a whisper, and Erkar had to strain to hear him above the nervous breath and muttered prayers. What do you know of the Hammer of Demons? Erkar stiffened as if in shock. His eyes darted as if to see if any faithful were nearby, even in darkness. The hammer? Where did you hear of it? A rumor, replied Alaric. A legend of the land, of a weapon that lies somewhere on Jacassi. You seek it? Perhaps. You cannot find it, Justicar. Why? Because it is an idea. From beyond the skull-studded inner doors of the chamber came a deep, rushing, mumbling sound, like an earthquake. The void eye shook, dislodging some of the skulls nailed on the black walls. Some of the slaves quivered in fear. Others grinned and whooped with anticipation. The orcs began a low, chanting death song, something ancient and primitive, and Alaric would not have been surprised if some of the killers, like Gareth, had joined in. Tell me, Erkar, whispered Alaric in the lieutenant's ear. One day we will all be taken to the promised land, said Erkar. We do not know where it is or how we will get there, only that we will be delivered. But there is more to know. There is more to what I know. Only I and a few of the faithful understand. Some of the more weak-minded would reject us if they understood. Their minds will be ready one day, but not yet. The hammer? The hammer shows us that we were not placed under Cassie just to run away. It is a weapon to be used against the enemy. The hammer of demons will be wielded by the faithful to punish the servants of chaos. Do you see, Justicar? Do you see why it is so dangerous? Why so many would despair to hear of it? Alaric couldn't find an answer for a moment. There was genuine fear in Urkar's face. The hammer represented something unexpected and powerful in the faithful's patchwork religion. The faithful just want to get rid of this planet. The faithful just want to get off this planet, said Alaric. The The faithful just want to get off this planet, said Alaric. But you know it's not that simple. The doors opened a crack, and a thin line of purplish, polluted light slid into the chamber. Blood rushed through the gap, covering the floor in a shallow red pool. One of the orcs howled like a wolf, and the others joined in. Some of the humans raised their voices too, echoing the frenzied applause from the vermin packing the void eye. Correct, Justicar, said Erkar. One day, the hammer of demons will be delivered to us, and we will raise it against the enemy. Only then will we in turn be delivered to the promised land. Do you see what that means, Justicar? It means that the Emperor isn't going to save you for free. It means that survival is not enough. The doors boomed open. A thigh-high tide of blood flooded the chamber, knocking some men off their feet. Alaric saw Girth dripping his hand into the blood and brandishing a bloody hand print across his face. Galhadros drew his chainsword. Urquhar turned back to his faithful. Take heart! These doors take us one step closer to the Emperor's halls. One step closer to death. One step closer to death, boys, said Gareth in reply, and the killers laughed raucously. Human blood doesn't come cheap. Let's show them the price. There was an ocean of blood beyond the doors. The canals must have been diverted to fill the whole void eye with it, and it churned beneath the hulls of a dozen ships of black timber, their sails daubed with bleeding runes. Already the blood bobbed with bodies and severed limbs. Fortified compounds separated the vermin in the stands from the dignitaries, and Alec was sure he saw the bloated whitish form of Agarthrax squatting in his cauldron of gore. The closest ship drew nearer. Arena slaves on board threw ropes through the door, and the orcs grabbed them eagerly, hauling the ship in. Orcs and killers were leaping onto its deck. Across the arena, the scene was being repeated, but this time demons were leaping onto the decks and scrabbing up the rigging. Glowing skinned creatures with shifting forms composed of teeth, claws, and shimmering muscle. It was a sea battle. The lords of Jakasi had given the subhuman filth of Gaul a different kind of murder to cheer. The first ship was full, and the next one drew near. Alaric followed Caheldros on it, along with several of Gareth's murderers and Erkard's faithful. The blood churned beneath it and drew away from the dog chamber towards the center of the arena, where could meet the demon-crewed warships. The crowds howled in anticipation. At least, thought Alaric grimly as he crouched on the deck of the ship, the good people of Gaul would not be disappointed. The unholy pitched wildly, and the howling winds that suddenly sheared across the void eye. Alaric gripped the rail on the prow as the ship tilted. A couple of slaves fell from the rigging into the blood. The battle had begun as soon as the slaves were on board. The wind had thrown the ships across the blood sea. The blood churned with predators who dragged down the slaves who fell in, and Alaric saw chewed corpses being thrown out of the blood, and the stands where Gaul's spectators tore them apart. It had happened so quickly that there had been no time to organize the slaves on the ship. They had only time to hold on and hope. The blood did not claim them. The opposing ships, crewed by demons, were launched from the far side of the arena to an enormous cheer from the crowds. "We're going to hit port side," yelled Gareth, who was armed with a pair of rusty daggers and holding on to the fore of the mast to keep from being flung across the deck. "Which way is port?" asked one of Gareth's killers. "There," replied Gareth, pointing. "Didn't your dad teach you nothing?" The unholy was drawn across towards the opposing ship. The name edged below its prow, pronounced on the name edged below its prow. My dad taught me port starboard. I'm geeking out over that. P.S. Like the end of the letter, the thing that people, the cursive, technology. That's how you know what it is. It's really simple. The unholy was drawn across towards the opposing ship. The name edged below its prow proclaimed it as Meat Hook. Red-skinned demons danced on its pitching deck. "Grapples ready!" shouted Gareth. "We're going aboard?" asked Erkar, who was holding onto the deck rail close to Gareth. "We go to them. If you want to die, you just sit back and let them come to us." "He's right," shouted Alaric. "If we let them pounce, we're dead. Erkar, get the faithful to draw on the meat hook. Gareth, get your men ready to board." "Just try and stop him," said Gareth. With a grin on his blood-spattered face, he looked completely at home. The slaves found a number of ropes with grappling hooks below decks. Erkar's faithful, muttering desperate prayers to the Emperor, got ready to fling them across to the enemy's ship as the meat hook closed in. Elsewhere, the sea battle was close and extremely bloody. The orcs were having the time of their lives as their ship, dubbed the Soul Bleed, had rammed the demon-crewed wrack. It was impossible to tell who was winning since both greenskins and demons were whooping with joy as they cut one another to pieces. The demons in the Soul Bleed were led by a huge creature, a dog-faced, muscular horror, armed with a huge axe, who stood on the stern, slicing up anything that came close. Alaric spotted the brand of a six-fingered hand seared in the demon's chest. The third slave ship, the Malice, was in the process of sinking. Its slaves scrambled up the tilting hull. The demons on the ship that had rammed it, the Gorehallow, were diving into the blood to encircle the sinking Malice like sharks and drag down any slaves who fell in. It was the death of the unholy and the meat hook that would decide whether the slaves or demons triumphed for the delight of God's hordes. A handful of hooks found purchase on the meat hook. A volley of arrows whistled across from the meat hook in reply. Alaric took cover as an arrow thunked into the deck beside him, and he saw that it was not an arrow at all, but a dart-shaped insect creature, mandibles working as it bored into the wood. One of Erkar's faithful screamed and stumbled backwards, with one of the creatures embedded into his chest. When he dropped one of the ropes attaching the unholy to the meat hook, and Alaric grabbed it. putting all of his weight into dragging the two ships together. Alaric's enhanced muscles burned in the process, burned as the prows of the ship swung together. With a screech of breaking wood, the two ships collided. Gareth stood up, brandishing his blades, and howled. The murderers followed him as he ran for the prow and leapt across. More arrows streaked onto the unholy, but the assault had already begun. The demons were dropping their their bows of bone, and leaping with teeth and claws into the fray. Gareth cut off a tentacled arm and slit open a belly, charging onto the slick of glowing, burning entrails. The demons on the meat hook were sinewy and cruel-faced, with tiny burning eyes and axe-like faces full of teeth. They grew new limbs and reformed to sprint spider-like through the rigging or alongside the unholy's hull. Alaric jumped the gap between the ships. A demon leapt down from the rigging onto him. Alaric didn't even draw his sword, simply grabbing the demon by the wrist and ankle, tearing it in two, and throwing it into the blood churning below. Gareth skidded into place beside him. One of his knives was gone, probably buried in the skull of a demon. He was covered in smoldering gore, for the demons bled scalding embers as well as blood. About damn time, cowed Gareth. Just like home. Alaric drew his sword and took stock of the situation. Gareth's charge had taken half the deck, but there were demons everywhere. More were emerging from below decks, but they were not warriors. They were shrieking creatures of skin and bone, flapping like startled birds. There's something below decks, shouted Alaric. These were just keeping it down there. Good. Demon corpses rained down. Kalhadros was somewhere up in the rigging, and Alaric could hear the scream of his chain blade through demonic flesh. The meat hook was a trap. The unholy had ran into it, but Alaric could not have stopped it. The only way to deal with it was to fight on through. The deck heaved. Men and demons were thrown into the blood. The stern of the meat hook splintered and burst into the air. Shards of bone-soaked timbers flying everywhere. A scaled shape ripped out of the ship. A sea serpent far longer than the meat hook dredged up from the emperor-forsaken trench in Dracassi's oceans and coiled up inside the ship, goaded until it was angry and ravenous. The serpent loped into the air above the ship, crashing through the rigging. Its head, a fanged horror, fringed with tentacles, plunged back into the deck amidships, and the meat hook split in two. The rear half tipped stern and filled with blood. The prow did not begin to sink straight away, buoyed up by the unholy alongside it. Alaric stood on the prow of the shattered meat hook, sword out, trying to follow the snake-like movements of the sea monster. It snapped at the rigging, picking up a demon in its mandibles and tossing it down its throat. A slave, one of Gareth's killers, followed, stabbing haplessly at the thing's vast jaws as he disappeared down its gullet. Oozing green eyes ringed its head. One of them settled on Alaric. The serpent reared up and arrowed back down at Alaric. The Grey Knight dived to one side, as his neck slammed in the prow of the meat hook. The remnants of the ship sagged under the impact, and the unholy listed within the weight. A tentacle whipped around Alaric's leg and dragged him towards the yarning jaws of the serpent. Alaric kicked out, shattering a tooth. Foul blood sprayed everywhere. In desperation, he braced his arms, and his jaws closed around him, and held the serpent's mouth open, bathed in its stinking, rotting breath, writhing flagellae down its throat, trying to snag Alaric's feet and bring him down. Alaric yelled as he fought to keep his elbows straight. He could hear the screaming below him as the slaves and demons already swallowed were forced through the serpent's corrosive guts. His sword was still in his hand, but to use it he would have to stop bracing the serpent's jaws, and his teeth would come crunching down on him. The whine of a chain blade cut through the serpent's roar. Blood sprayed over Alaric as the tip of a chainsword bore through the top of the serpent's jaw. The serpent convulsed, and Alaric planted a foot on the huge fang and kicked himself free. Alaric skidded onto the deck of the shattered meat hook as the serpent reared up in pain. A figure was flung off the top of its head and landed near Alaric, just keeping its footing on the blood-slick wood. It was Kelheldros, the alien. Xenos, said Alaric, you saved me. It benefits none of us if you are dead. We can't beat the thing, said Alaric, looking over at the serpent, which was demolishing what remained of the meat hook's stern. No, we cannot, but this battle is over. The winds have changed. If we cut the unholy free, we can get it back to the dock. It was the serpent they wanted to see. Alaric followed Kelheldros' gaze towards the crowd. They were frenzied with delight to see the serpent was swallowing slaves and demons alike. They were shrieking their approval of the orcs and the demons butchering one another on the rack, too, which was being driven closer to the wreck of the meat hook. Alaric could see Agrothrax in the crowd, wallowing in his cauldron of gore, and surrounded by slaves close to the wall that encompassed the mock ocean of the blood. He could see Duke Venalator, too, and dignified among the crowd as he watched with slaves providing entertainment for Khorne's faithful. Cut the unholy free, said Alaric. Get them to safety. And you, said the alien, survival is not enough. The rack drifted closer. Alaric could see the dog-faced demon champion flinging an orc down from the stern. On the prow, the orc leader, One Ear, was building up a pile of broken demons with a two-handed hammer. Kelheldros didn't hang around to see what Alaric was planning to do. The Eldar leapt from the prow of the meat hook onto the deck of the Unholy and immediately set about cutting the ropes, attaching the two ships together. The front mast of the meat hook was almost immediately horizontal as the prow half sunk further. It was pointing towards the approaching rack. Alaric ran up to it, struggling to keep his balance as his considerable weight tipped the mast down. The rack closed further. The demon champion bit into an orc, bright blood running down its scarred chest. The crowd in the stands was in a bloody frenzy, and Agathrax bellowed his approval. Alaric broke into a run. He reached the end of the mast and jumped. The deck of the rack swirled beneath him. He was strong, but he barely made it. His chest thumped onto the deck of the rail of the ship's prow, and he grabbed with one hand, his other still holding the sword. With a final effort, he hauled himself onto the deck of the rack. One Ear looked down at him and grinned. The alien looked like it was having the time of its life. Several other orcs were still alive, enthusiastically wrestling demons on the ground or hacking them with cleavers. The demon champion fixed its eyes on Alaric. It was half again as tall as Grey Knight, packed with muscle, and drooling from its dog-like muzzle. It fought with claws and a barbed tail. Dismembered greenskins were piled up around its feet. A pair of ragged, leathery wings sprouted from its back as it snarled a war cry its demonic tongue and leapt into the air. The crowd cheered as the demon charged, swooping down towards the prow on its wings. Its weight alone would crush Alaric onto the deck. Alaric moved faster than he had ever done before. He dropped his sword and grabbed the mast, which jutted from the prow of the rack. With massive effort, he broke it free and turned it around so that the wooden point was aimed at the demon's chest. Too late, the demon tried to correct its charge. It beat its wings once to carry it over Alaric, but Alaric lunged, and the point of the mast hit the demon in the stomach. The demon's weight forced it into the mast, and it slid, dead weight, down until its feet hit the deck. Impaled on the mast, stuck like an insect pinned to a board, it screamed. Alaric pushed down the broken mast and forced the demon to its knees. The crowd adored it, and the orcs cheered too. In the stand, Agrathrax scowled. The six-fingered hand branded on the demon's chest indicated that it belonged to Agathrax. No doubt he had been sent to the Void Eye to help humiliate Venalator's slaves. As far as Agathrax was concerned, the battle had not worked out as planned. Alaric had picked up his sword again. With a single bloody strike, he struck the demon champion's head from its shoulders. Burning, multicolored blood sprayed from the stump of its neck. Alaric let go of the mast, and the demon's body kneeled over to one side of the deck. Alaric bent down and picked up its head. One Ear saluted Alaric for the job well done. The other demons in the rack keened, and the remaining orcs plunged into them, tearing malformed limbs from their bodies and cutting torsos open. The sea battle in the Void Eye was emphatically over. There was one more victory to win. Alaric stood up on the deck and drew his arm back. He had only just enough strength left, and he would have to be accurate. He didn't know if he could do it. The crowd cheered him, thinking this a victory pose, and Alaric let their howls of delight give him strength. He threw the head as far as he could. It was still snarling and glaring at him as it tumbled towards the stands. With a wet thump, it landed at Duke Venalator's feet. Every eye in the arena followed as it fell. Every eye turned to see the look of pure hatred on Agathrax's face. The rack drifted towards the arena entrance, where the slaves and the unholy were already disembarking. The orcs around Alaric were celebrating their victory, following his lead by hurling chunks of dead demon towards the stands. One Ear bellowed a war cry, and the other greenskins joined in. For all Alaric knew, they were chanting his praises. There's like. How long do I have? What do I have? Okay, because here's the thing, right? Honestly, how long do you want this to take? I can make it take as long as you want. No, there's no extra bad pictures. It's just not true. There's nothing. because none of them are weak. If we had weak people here. The Despoiler of Chalcedon, the bloody hand of Serantis Minor, the end of empires. Argothrax the Magnificent slid from his cauldron into the entrailed pool that dominated his sanctum beneath Gaul. Human emotions did not trouble the mind of a demon. No mortal could truly understand what went on in the demon's head without going insane, for the rules of logic had no hold over them. No human emotion could therefore be properly ascribed to a demon. Nevertheless, Argothrax was definitely angry. Filth! The demon bellowed as his bloated body sank into the tangle of entrails. Whelp! Weakling dog, he will pay! He and his slaves and his natives. That filth will suffer. My lord, said Kufarin, the major domo of Argothrax's sanctum, something has vexed you. Argothrax glared at him. Kufarin had been completely human before he had died and been drawn into the form of bone-dry mummified corpse into the Argothrax's army as it marched across the ruins of his homeworld. Kufarin had been some kind of king or high priest thousands of years ago, but he had forsaken whatever he had in life to serve chaos and death. The upstart Venalator, the near-human thing who calls itself a duke, he has sought to humiliate me. Ha! Me! It is the way of Drakasi. So is revenge, snarled Argothrax. Who do we have on the streets and on the plains? Who heeds the words of Argothrax? Kufarin snapped his bony fingers, and lesser demons, scurrying things like animated blobs of flesh with vestigial limbs, hurried away from him in the dark corners of the sanctum. The sanctum was spherical cyst in the earth, half filled with the entrails of thousands of sacrifices. A spur of rock held the sacrificial altar, black with generations of blood, as well as Argothrax's mortal followers like Kufarin, somewhere to stand when they addressed their master. One of the demons brought Kufarin a heavy book bound in strips of beaten brass. Kufarin leafed through the pages, on which were written the names of thousands of organizations and individuals loyal to Argothrax. Every lord of Drakasi had followers he could call upon, many of them hidden deep in the underbelly of Corin cities, waiting for the call to action. Lord Ebendrake's pronouncement of the crusade has led to a great mobilization, said Kufarin. We have called upon the legion of the unhallowed to bring themselves forth from the jungles and march under your banner, Lord Argothrax. Savages, said Agathrax. Primitives, but useful. Who else? The 13th Hand are still off-world, but they are returning at your command. The warp shall deliver them to us in a few days. They are battle-hardened, my lord. They have acquired many new members. That is good. The 13th Hand were fanatical murder cult, whose leaders had been ordained in the will of Khorne by Agathrax himself. What of the warp? Relations are strained, said Gufern. Many have been lost. The warp is like so many losses. Profligacy in the arenas has left us. I am the despoiler of Colchedon, spat Agathrax. How many billions of gallons of blood rained down into the warp by my behest? The demon lords will heed one of their own, one such as I. I want hunter demons on the streets, blacks as the void, and with the Venalter scent. I want furies in the sky following every movement of his underlings. I want the Hecatomb under siege. It will be done. The losses at the Void Eye will require greater recompense for the warp. Tell them they are having revenge. The Nalator and his Pedestartes kill my demon champion to insult me? And even took its head for himself. It is an insult to all demonkind. And the warp will have its due if Nalator suffers. We will bring him low, and then we will kill him. Tell that to the warp. It will listen. Very well, my lord. And the rest of them, the haunters to the nethermost shadow, the mutant cults beneath their scorn. Bring them all in. And the watchers? Agathrax paused. The lords of Drakasi spied on one another. It was like a game played with agents who went in deep cover amongst the coteries of lords. No doubt other lords had eyes and ears among Agathrax's followers. Agathrax had uncovered and eaten more than a few of them. They were mortals and demons with some talent to obscure their true selves, and they were pariahs. It was not the way of Khorne to skulk in the shadows, and so Drakasi's spies were a sort of underclass, present at the very highest layers of the planet's society. Agathrax had his own shape-shifting demons, and old-fashioned human informers bound to him by contracts of blood. If they can fight, said Agathrax, punishing Venaltor is a higher priority than anything else. The games! Eben Drake's crusade. Everything can wait until he's been brought low. If it is your wish, Lord Agathrax, said Kufarin. He bowed, his ancient death shrouded by death before his master, and turned to walk back to the spur of rock and begin organizing his lord's slaves. The light of the sanctum dimmed. Agathrax Agathrax sank into the great cauldron of entrails. Stephen thought, we are reaching levels of incoherency. But as I would say, the only way to balance out toxins is with more toxins. We like the toxins. Everyone's toxin about that toxin. I remember, said Calhadros, when I learned of the fall. Calhadros' cell was relatively clean. The other slave on the Hecatomb knew better than to invade the place. Calhadros had painted complex rune patterns in the walls, and paint mixed with blood and sand. His green metallic armor lay against the wall. The Eldar was picking the blood from between the teeth of the chainsword. The sea serpent's blood had been particularly viscous, and it was his job to work it out of the mechanism. The fall? Asked Alric. I forget, human, that you are not well versed in our ways. Some of you have studied us. I understand. The biologists of your Inquisition. The better to kill us, of course, but not you. I know that you are aliens. Strange. That is all I once knew of you. The journey back to the Void Eye had been deeply strained. The Nalator had stood glowering at them from the helm of the Hecatotomb, the head of Agothrax's demon champion in his hand. Many slaves had been lost, and Haggard had been unable to keep up with the wounded. The orcs, forced to wait until last for treatment since they healed so well, were squabbling with each other and their barred enclave. Alaric had sought out Calhadros. It had become apparent to him early in his career as a Grey Knight that having his life saved at least deserved a few words of thanks, and the possibility of an ally in Dracasi, even an alien, could not be ignored. Long ago, my kind ruled the galaxy, continued Calhadros, much as your kind claim to rule it now. We were artists and aesthetists, while you are soldiers. We took worlds and made them beautiful instead of merely inhabiting them like insects in a nest. None taken, said Alric. Calhadras gave him a quizzical look. Quite. But we were arrogant, prideful. Some of what I see in your kind, my kind, must have seen in themselves. They indulged their base delights. The warp took heed. From the sinful pride of my people was born one of the great powers of the warp. I cannot speak of it. It plagues us and reaps its toll among humankind too. I imagine this is not something an alien would normally speak of to a human. Indeed, it is not. Many would think of me as a traitor for saying it. But then I am a traitor for surviving here, among such pollution. Then why tell me? Because I see it on this world too. And in your Imperium. Calhadras looked up from his chain blade. The fall killed the better of my species. Only those who saw it coming escaped in their world ships. My kind, so far advanced compared to yours, was almost wiped out. Think what another fall would do to you. Do you not think you will see it coming? Or that it has not already begun? You are living through the death of your species at this very moment, and you do not realize it. I cannot believe that, said Alric. There must be hope. Gahadros arched an eyebrow. Why? Because without it, we are lost. You are lost anyway. Whether you truly believe in salvation or not is irrelevant. Death is death. Perhaps everything you say is true, and these are the death throes of the human race. But even if that was true, I would not lose faith. There must be hope, and I must fight for the Emperor against chaos and its servants. That is just the way it is. That is insanity. Wrong. It's being human. That's it? That is why you have managed to spread to the stars and found this Imperium, in spite of all the obvious primitivism of your minds? That's right, said Alric. We believe, I suppose. That's it. There are such strange things in the galaxy, said Kahadros. None there we can agree. Kahadros put his chainsword to one side and began on his armor. Like the weapon, it was old and battered, but well maintained. Beneath the armor, Kahadros' body was slim and muscular. quite the opposite of Alric's own oversized frame. He was scarred too, and like Alric, not all of them were war wounds. Runes were scored onto the elder's torso. They were symbols with half glimpsed meaning, half a face without a mouth, a hand, a stylized blade, all twining together in thorny knotwork. I do not think, Grey Knight, that you are here to discuss the state of the universe, said Galhadros. I am here to thank you. It is not necessary. It does not benefit any of us to lose our best fighter. You took a risk. One can hardly survive on Jakasi without taking risks. If we flee death, we only run into its waiting arms. My own chances of survival are increased if you were there by its side, so I took risks to prevent your death. Anyone understanding the reality of our situation will do the same thing. Likewise, you are taking a considerable risk by speaking willingly to an alien that your kind despises to the point of genocide, and so you have a reason to be here too. Alec leaned across the rail and looked down on the floor of the main chamber. Kelhadros' cell was one floor up, and gave him an excellent view of what was going on in the Hecatomb slaves. Look down there, he said. Kelhadros stood by his side. At what? The greenskins. The animals? I sully my eyes with them as little as possible. Then, for the first time, try watching them. The orcs who survived the Void Eye, relatively unscathed, were scraping with each other amid the filth of the enclosure. One ear was standing aside, barking insults and grunting appreciation. They are turning on each other, said Caldras, for they know the humans will mass against them if they do not. They are cowards. Wrong, said Alric. Watch. One ear dragged two fighting greenskinners apart. He cuffed the loser around the neck of the back of the head, shoving him away. The winner he clapped on the back, much as he congratulated Ulrich for cutting the head off the demon, and turned back to the other greenskins scrapping. That one, said Caldras. He's in charge. Exactly. But it is the way of the animal. The strongest rules. And he is using that. He is training them, toughening them up. He simply wants to survive. We all want to survive, Eldar. One ear has a plan, which is more than most humans have here. Think about it. The best way for the orcs to survive on Drakasi is to make themselves essential. That way, they can be sure that the Nalator won't throw their lives away. The better they fight, the better the show they put on for the crowds, the longer they will live. So the creature has a plan? A plan to survive. Kahadro smiled, which was disconcerting to see, since his alien face produced only expressions that looked fundamentally wrong to human eyes. I was under the impression that you humans and these greenskins once encountered each other in the early stages of exploring the galaxy, and took an instant dislike to one another. It is never dimmed. It sounds as if you admire one ear. I hate the orc, just like any other emperor-fearing citizen. But the fact remains that one ear has a better grasp of the situation and a sounder plan for surviving it than most of the slaves here. I thought the same as you, Kahadros, and assumed that an orc was just a fighting machine that couldn't even think. Then I took the time to watch, and I found I was wrong. What is your plan? Asked Kahadros bluntly. I haven't quite decided yet, said Alric, but I am not willing to wait in this damn ship to die, or to serve their god by fighting until someone kills me in the arenas. I'm getting out, and you need me. This time Alric smiled. Forgive my bluntness, Eldar, but I do not seek you out in the name of interspecies relations. You are one of the Hecatomb's best fighters, and you have the run of the ship. I may well have a use for you. Be ready for that, Kelhadros, and try not to die in the meantime. How do I know? How do you know I will agree to your plan, human, whatever it is, that I do not have a way of my own escape? Because you are still here, said Alaric, and walked away. Yeah, we're going strong. We're going strong. We are going strong. Incoherency level maintaining below 35%. There's a lot of really great themes that I'm picking up on. This is maybe the fourth time I think this could have been the fourth or third time I've read this book. There's a lot of great themes going on here. There's a lot of great stuff. I like it. It's best to really figure out the themes that one likes to draw from it, but I just think there's a lot to choose from. Because, like, it's never that clear cut. Defeat offer. I guess the big theme that they should be coming from a multitude of directions should probably be the defeat will come from so many directions. It's like a hydra. It really defeat comes in the sweetened envelope of a promise. I think a promise from like a betrayer. So that never let defeat guide you, because defeat will always have, no matter like. You will know the choice that you're taking is it will lead you to defeat because it's based on fear. The fear choice is always the worst kind of defeat. There's nothing worse than the fear choice. Which is tough because in combat, I mean, getting shot at is probably very not fun. And getting shot at probably means you probably don't want to move and you just want to sit there. And that means that in combat, most times people just like want to just defend and sit on like a mound or something. And that's what gets them killed, is they don't maneuver. But that's also the thing that saves their lives. They don't maneuver. So it's a very precarious balance. But it's the fear. It's the fear that causes defeat. So I would imagine. So I would imagine. There's a big asterisk to that entire diatribe. Duke Venaltor stood at the helm of the hecatomb, watching as the war city of Gorgath rolled up under the horizon. The hecatomb was a bulbous hulk. Fat and groaning, Venaltor appreciated the impression of the ship. It looked full to bursting with slaves or riches, or perhaps blood like a sated parasite. Its black timbers creaked as it sailed glowing through the blood canal that wound through Gorgoth. Above the masts and rigging were like a ribcage of dark wood. Its sails like funeral shrouds. Dracassi's dawn was fighting to clamber above the horizon, but the night was putting up a stern resistance. As Venaltor had known it would, the first of the shadows peeled off from the rigging and slid down the mast near the stern. It pulled the deck, twin eyes flickering in its dark body. Another slid over the deck rail. Venaltor often had his scaphoids stand to attention on deck as an honor guard, but not tonight. He wanted to do this alone. The first shadow skittered along the edge of the deck, heading for the raised helm where Venaltor stood. It wanted to sneak up behind him. No doubt it had its scent, and it had tracked him all the way from the warp. It was probably aeons old, congealed from a nightmare in the warp, and finally let loose in real space to hunt. It was strange that it should die here after all that. More shadows gathered. More form-fanged maws and keen silver eyes. They thought that Venaltor could not see them. Venaltor's sword was in his hand, even as the first demon slunk towards him. He had drawn it so quickly that not even a demon's eyes could have followed its movement. The toad will not have his fill of blood from me tonight, he snarled. He spun and sliced the demon behind him in two. The shadow stuff of its body sprayed black blood. The other hunter demons howled and bounded towards him. They were in the rigging, charging across the deck. The Narutor met them head on, slicing the first and spearing the next through the eye. It was a display of swordsmanship so precise and flowing, it was not combat at all, but the carving work of art into the flesh of the hunter demons. Nalator bayed into them. Then Nalator bade them into charging, and then cut them apart as they ran at him. One dived down from the rigging, maw destined to swallow him whole. The Nalator let its substance flow over him, and then slid it open and stepped out of its body like a man free of a straitjacket. He flicked the black gore off his blade and finished killing the hunter demons. It was not even a contest, just a matter of course. A final flourish. The Nalator returned to the helm for a while, as the blood of the hunter demons soaked into the planks of the deck. Eventually, the slave master shambled from inside the ship. It has come to pass? The scaphoid asked. Of course it has, said Venalator. Agathrax is a creature of habit. He felt he was insulted at Gaul, and he wanted me dead, so he sent his hunters after me. No doubt their trail will lead us back to Agathrax's court in the warp. A war with Agathrax is something we can well do without. Those are words of an animal of real space, not a creature of the warp, replied Venaltor sternly. War is war. It comes upon us not as a plague to be feared, but as an opportunity to be grasped. Agathrax has decided to make war upon me. Every lord of Jacassi must war with his peers, It is as sure as law is on any planet. I shall make war upon him in return, and I shall win, and his share of Jacassi shall be mine. And Ebendrake? The dragon will not know. He focuses too much on his crusade to be bothered with us. Agathrax will fall before Ebendrake knows of any feud. Make ready my briefing in chambers. I wish to review the disposition of our followers. This war must have a general. Very well. What of the slaves? They plot as they might. The religious ones pray, and the killers plan to murder us all. Good, good. And the Grey Knight? He is quiet. He spoke with the Eldar. Otherwise has done little to elicit suspicion. The Space Marine and the Eldar? The universe brings some new. The universe brings something new with every moment. You must be about your duties then, slave master. The slave master bowed to the blood-stained deck and scuttled back towards the ship. Dawn was breaking over Gorgoth. It broke, as it always did, over war. The Nalator watched the sun rise and vowed, as he did every morning, that it would set on a world where Duke Venalator held little more of Drakasi in his fist.